Hang on a second while I get everything back on. Okay. All right, it is 7:30 and let's see, I think we're live. Thank you again for joining me for another Yay Emacs session. It is January 28th, 2024, and this week has been kind of a weird week, so just talk about whatever we've got to talk about. I didn't actually get to run to the things that I said I'd work on last week, like sound decks, approximate sound matching, or all of that other stuff. But I did figure out how to get audio clips from these Yay Emacs live streams and get them all synchronized with closed captions and sketches and other things in my blog. And the other thing that I wanted to cover today was how to explore Emacs Lisp functions using things like LDoc and helpful and elisp-demos. So last session, I talked about my evil plans for this thing, and I wanted to extract the clip of that section and turn it into a narrated blog post. I didn't want to always post videos because sometimes, as in the case of that one, it's just a sketch and the audio, and it's a lot more efficient to just post the SVG as well as the audio recording rather than a video where the visual doesn't change as much. The other nice thing about trying to figure out how to do this with audio is that I can then make it more interactive in the sense that I can highlight the transcript, or I can let people click on the SVG and get it to jump to the right places instead of just watching. I could use that to get a video to do the right thing too. At some point in my life, I will figure that out. But for now, I figured it was good to start simple with some video. So this is what I ended up doing. I've got this blog post somewhere here. Hang on, I have it in one of my windows. Was it this one? I will just, here it is. Okay. So I'll show you the result first, and then I'll talk a little bit about how I made this happen behind the scenes. So this is an audio clip, about 5 minutes from the previous thing. And if we play this, if I do this out loud, other people can help out with questions and comments, like the way that you're all doing now, which is great, fantastic. And of course, those are all very selfish reasons. So I'm hoping other people are getting. So while that's playing, I'm displaying closed captions over here so that there's something to look at, and sometimes it's easier for people to understand when there's text. I tend to watch all my movies with subtitles these days, so I like that part. And there's also this also gets highlighted depending on what the current section is. The way that it works is it listens to the cue change. So there's a track that has the VTT file, the captions file, which I slightly edited from the just automatic transcripts that you can get out of OpenAI Whisper. So that's a VTT file, which I'll show you in a bit. And it listens to the time based on those cue changes, and it highlights the relevant section. So for example, if I jump to the middle here, it says you learned something from that process, and this is the section that it's in, and this is the highlight in the SVG. I think I've made it so that you can click on the times, and then it'll jump to the appropriate section. And I think you can actually, sometimes, I'd previously gotten it to work so that you could actually also click on the SVG. But, oh, actually that worked. See, look at that. I can click on the SVG, and it will jump to the right spot as well. So how does that all work? Well, with Emacs, of course. So I have my org mode post for this here. Yes. So this is my blog post for my evil plan for Yay Emacs, and I have a bunch of like divs with classes just to start trying to target different things. In org, you can basically just say begin underscore and then anything, and it'll turn that into a class, into a div with that class, wrapping around your begin and end. So I have a custom audio link type here, and what it does is it exports the audio player, and if you specify captions file, which also I've added to this isn't built in, then it will read the captions file and output the track information. And you can see that here if you look at audio export. So in audio export, I'm still learning how to work with this variable pitch thing. I would like my code to be fixed pitch, so I will play around with that someday. Okay, so if you've got a captions parameter in the thing here, it will now output this track kind, subtitles, label captions, and so on and so forth. Let me turn my highlight mode back on so you can see that. And then if you have captions, it also includes this little bit of JavaScript. So can't really get around using JavaScript for this one, but it should degrade well, so that if you're viewing it on Planet Emacs Life or in Elfeed or some other viewer that doesn't have JavaScript, then it should just not show anything. You can play the audio, you can read the text transcript that's included below it, but you won't get any of this confusing behavior. But if you do have JavaScript enabled, then it will display the active cue or the active caption in the captions div for that audio. So that's how the closed captions appear, and now I can just add that very easily by including that. And actually, come to think of it, I should make sure that I automatically determine the VTT from the file name, because I usually put them in the same directory and named the same way. Okay, so that's how the track element gets added. But what about the transcript at the bottom? So I have a little bit of code here that takes the subtitle list from the subtitles. So I've got here a subed parse file which just reads the VTT using subed and returns a list of subtitles with the start and end times. And it's pretty long, but you know it's all there. So this is the ID, this is the starting timestamp, this is the ending timestamp, this is the text of it, and if there are any comments, then the fourth element will, well, element number 4 will have it. Actually, number 5, but people are strange and count from 0 in this world. Okay, so it gets me that, and then I have a little function here that groups them according to the section they're in. Let me show you what sections those are. I'm using find file at point. This is that one. So in order to mark out the chapters, I just add note comments here. So that way I can group the different subtitles by those sections, and that makes it easier to read the transcript when things are divided. So then printing it out is a matter of going over that with map_concat and including this audio time with a data start and a data stop. And this gives me this kind of list. Now I've put that as an org babel result so that if I wanted to change how this is set up, maybe organize it differently, maybe indent some things or promote things to headings instead of bold list items, then it would be easy for me to remove it from the results drawer and edit it. So then this gives me this span class audio time data start and data stop, which my JavaScript code can take a look at and highlight whenever the time is whenever the time reaches that. So that's handled by this bit of HTML export. Notice that I'm using so there's that div that I mentioned earlier that has a special class on it. And that allows me to target that specific section with some CSS. I can say, all right, for the SVGs in this one, if it's highlighted, then use this color as fill, and position the sticky at top thing so that as you scroll down, the audio is always visible for this blog post, which allows you to have the narration read to you while you're scrolling through. I don't want to auto scroll because that feels a little bit too much. I want to give people more control over that. But it's a nice compromise because then at least you can always pause or keep track of the captions while you are looking at the sketch. So it's starting to turn into a tiny little presentation. Okay, so the way that it works is very much like the closed captions JavaScript. For every audio time span there is, we're going to turn that into a button so that we can jump to that specified time. And whenever the closed captions change, then look for the span of audio time that we want to highlight. We also use pretty much the same code to highlight the SVG. And what I've done with the SVG is I went through the process that I outlined previously in when I talked about animating things. Yeah, so I have a blog post here, animating SVG topic maps with Inkscape, Emacs, FFmpeg, and Real.js, where I talked about how to take an SVG file and start to simplify it so that it makes it easier to animate. I've refactored the code a little bit so that it's easier for me to animate a sketch with just the highlights changing, and that's what I used here to identify the different paths and then start setting them up. The image, so the image started off as a PDF. I now have a little bit of code that allows me to give a color scheme. So I like to highlight most of my sketches with yellow highlighter, pretend yellow highlighter. The actual device only outputs gray, so black, white, and 2 shades of gray. But it can be fun to distinguish the sketches about technology versus the sketches about parenting versus the sketches about everything else, so that when I'm looking in my sketchbook, sketches.sashacho.com, when I'm looking in my sketchbook, then I can see, oh yeah, this is kind of the balance of things, and so forth. So I can now select that color scheme. I usually select it based on the file name, but I wanted to be able to select the color scheme from Emacs Lisp as well when I'm recoloring sketches. So that's all cool. And now I can also just match on a specific sort of thing. So here I'm matching only on the gray things, and I want to turn those into instead of one big path, I want to break them up into smaller paths. So that afterwards, I identified the paths to assign items to assign IDs to them. I got the IDs back, and then I made a table with the start and end times. I currently just manually copy and paste these times from the VTT. So what I did was I looked at the VTT file and I copied the start time into this section over here. So for example, this one is we bounce ideas around. The ID that I assigned to it is hbounce, and so we copied it over, and then I used this little bit of code to edit the SVG file itself, so that I can add the audio time classes to the SVG elements and the data start and data stop attributes directly. So Alejandro has a question: if this is configured specifically for this org file, or is it for all org files? I'm still experimenting with this code, so I don't know whether what I want it to be yet. So all of these things are just for this particular file. And if I find that I'm using this technique a lot, then then it'll be something that I can pull out into a function that I can easily call, or maybe even into my standard JavaScript file. But because you can export little bits of HTML inside your org subtree, it's easy to make something that just targets this specific post by adding a special class around it. And then I can run it through my whole org 11t export process. I'm going to drink some water first. So the end result is I have this SVG, and actually, let me see if I can open it up here, and you can take a look at the markup itself. So, so this SVG has path elements that represent the highlights, and they start off with a regular sort of blue, but my JavaScript looks for the audio time classes and looks at the start and stop. If the current time of the audio being played back is within those times, then it will add a class to it that highlights it in a different way. And the nice thing about all of this is that because I can work with org tables in order to specify this, I don't have to, think about the markup, think about the times as I'm trying to edit the SVG elements and hoping that I don't mess up the syntax, because if I have a typo, then the whole image won't display. So hooray for Emacs Lisp. That's how the whole thing came together. And as I mentioned, it's an interesting technique to have a narration be synchronized with closed captions as well as highlights in both this text transcript and a sketch. So I think I might use that for future posts, in which case I might make something that allows me to just give it the sound file, which I've extracted from the clip, from the video, using the transcript as the basis, in fact, to get that sound file. And then it will do all of this stuff for me. So if I don't need to do anything fancy with the transcript highlighting and I just want that kind of list, then it could be super straightforward to make something like this for the cases where I'm talking about a sketch. You can also extend the idea to talk about a screenshot. One of the things that I want to make it easier to do is, just look at something in more detail while having the narration come to you, so that you're not trying to remember the image as well as scroll down. I'm trying to figure out how this works in terms of the screen layout, since I want the images to be nice and large, but I also want the text to be easy to get to while you're looking at the image or whatever. So audio narration might be an interesting compromise, where you can be just be looking at the screenshot or the video. Well, if it's a video, it will have that automatically, but it could be an animated GIF or a series of images, and have that audio narration talk you through it, so that you don't have to scroll, and so that you can jump around as you like. So that's that. Then, of course, since I wanted it to break down, not so much break down, but I wanted the RSS to still make sense. I wanted to make sure that it looked okay and behaved okay on things like Planet Emacs Life or Elfeed. So as an aside, I ended up digging into how to get that working, because it turns out that Planet Emacs Life, Planet Emacs Life uses this very old RSS aggregator called Planet Venus, which hasn't been updated in more than a decade, and didn't actually handle SVG mix blend mode, which I use so that the highlights don't like. So the highlights here are sometimes specified on top of the text. So if I just leave it as a regular SVG element, they will cover it, and I want to just use mix blend mode darken so that the highlight and the text can both be visible at the same time, and I don't have to worry about the order of elements in my SVG. But they didn't display well in Planet Emacs Life. And since I run planetemacslife.com, I can fiddle with it until I get it to work. So this is how it originally looked in Planet Emacs Life. And then I had to dig around in it, which is more of a Python thing than an Emacs thing. But I did start to learn how to use PDB to interactively debug Python code, which was kind of fun. Eventually, I figured out how to update the sanitizer so that it would allow me to use the SVG attributes that I wanted to use. I mean, the SVG CSS styles that I wanted to use. So then it worked there. Then I also wanted to get it to work for Elfeed, because I know a lot of people use Elfeed to read RSS feeds in Emacs. I didn't need to have all the fancy audio closed captioning work in Elfeed, because that's too much. But I did want the SVGs to display. And in Elfeed, the SVGs sort of work in that mix blend mode works, but it was too big. So I said, okay, how do we fiddle with this? It turns out that the SHR library that Elfeed uses to render HTML ignores the cases, like it lower cases all the HTML tags because it uses libxml parse HTML region, which doesn't pay attention to the case sensitivity of tags. Normally, you don't want case sensitivity for HTML tags, but SVGs have case sensitive tags. So I had to like rummage around in there in order to find out what to fix. And it turns out that most other parsers just special case the SVG tags to get them back to the correct cases for it. So I have this defconst which defines all those attributes, and this recursive function which goes through this DOM tree and corrects the case of those by using the setcar function. And then SHR tag SVG can use that to fix the SVG tags so that then they will properly listen to width and height and view box. Width and height always work, but it would ignore the view box, which is kind of annoying. So now the view box will work, which I like. And I've submitted that patch to Emacs Devel, so they will go and talk about it and figure out whether it makes sense to them or not. So that's the kind of the rabbit hole that I end up going through just because of this. Like, oh, let's use SVGs more. So Emacs. At least we can tinker around with these things. The libxml parse HTML region call itself is it just calls the C library that does the actual parsing, but there is that layer on top where you can fiddle with the Emacs Lisp functions that call that in order to get the right output. So that's a detour that I went on in order to get this stuff to work. But I'm very tickled that I now have closed captions for audio and synchronized sketches, and things sort of look okay on Planet Emacs Life, even if you don't have JavaScript enabled. So, oh, yes. Okay. Okay, where are we now? Okay. Let me drink some more water. Okay. So then the second part of this live stream, I wanted to share some of the things that help me explore Emacs Lisp functions as I'm doing all this digging around looking for stuff, and might help other people as well. Mostly because I've been meaning to record a tutorial on this, so we're going to see if the live stream will make it easier for me to pull out this section and talk about how to explore functions. So one of the nice things about Emacs is when you go to implement something, there's probably something very close to what you want to do that you can adapt or use as use for ideas for building things. And there are many different ways to make this easier for you, make it easier for you to explore Emacs Lisp functions. Now I'm going to try to start in a second a new Emacs so that I can make sure that whatever I'm showing starts off as I can show you the full step-by-step thing instead of taking a lot of things for granted in my configuration. So I'm going to move this to the side over here, and here's our fresh new Emacs in a separate user. Let me, in fact, this thing over here, and I want to text scale adjust, make this a little bit bigger so that it's easier to see. Maybe that's too big. Okay, okay, here we go. So, how do you find functions in Emacs? Well, there's the apropos command, which is spelled apropos because the S is silent. So apropos lets you search for something. So, for example, if you're looking for, let's say, function and anything related to finding a function, describing a function, function help, maybe. Then it will show you a list of those functions that where the documentation matches those keywords or the name of the function matches those keywords. This is one of the things that I often do when I'm trying to find something that there's probably a function out there to do what I want to do, so I start looking for it. But another way to do it is just to type in the names and hope that you can find the function that way. Now, when you're starting off with a plain Emacs, it's a little bit sparse. There's, you actually have to remember the things. If you start typing describe, you can use tab for completion. You have to hit it twice to get more of a completion list. So this is one of the things that I tend to encourage people to change right away, because completions make it much easier for you to see what you actually want to do. One of the things that I like to use for this is a package called Vertico. And if I evaluate that, so if I use the package and turn on Vertico mode, then you'll see that it displays the functions right there. So I can, even if I don't remember how to spell apropos, I can start typing APR and it will display it right away. If I'm looking for something like, function, you'll notice that it can't find anything, but that's because we're still missing the next thing that I want to share, which is Orderless. Orderless is a package that works very well with different kinds of completion. And if you use this little snippet over here, which sets your completion styles to use Orderless, so I'm using eval here to just evaluate that bit, then I can say meta x, and function here will now find things where the match isn't at the beginning. It can be in the middle. It can be somewhere else. You can even specify matches out of order. So for example, if I know something is related to functions, I might start typing function or whatever, and then I might start saying, oh yeah, it's a describe thing, right? So even if you're specifying things out of order, you can get the completion for it. Often when I'm looking around for something, I will use this describe function with Orderless and Vertico to just start typing the words that I think it might be called. And let me show you that now. So for example, the describe function here, what describe function does is it gets a name of a function and it will display the documentation for it. Let's say, for example, let's look for a describe package. So it will describe this information. It will show you where it's bound. It will show you what its arguments are and what the documentation is. So that's Orderless. It helps you find things. And the other nice thing that you can add on top of this completion is a package called marginalia. Anyway, marginalia, sure. Now, when you're describing functions, sometimes the first line is all you need in order to figure out whether this is something you want or not. And marginalia will let you, let's say, for example, if you're looking for a function, it will let you see the arguments as well as a brief description of it in the right side here. So it adds these margin notes to a lot of the searches, a lot of the completions that you have available. So let's say, for example, if I'm looking for, I want a function that works with sequences and it makes things flatter. No, it makes things, okay, let's pick something that involves splitting things into different groups. And sec partition here, you can see here that it takes a sequence and it returns a list of elements of sequence grouped into subsequences of length n. So having that function description right there can be really helpful when you're kind of trying to find something. Okay, and all right. So that's marginalia. Another way to find something if you aren't quite sure what you're looking for is Shortdoc. in Shortdoc, you can give it a group of functions, and the wonderful Emacs developers have already created a whole bunch of cheat sheets for these different functions. For example, I do a lot of work with sequences, which is basically any kind of list or vector or I think sets, maybe, I don't know, anyway, things, sequences. So there is a Shortdoc for sequence. And what it does is it shows you very short documentation, hence Shortdoc, showing you the different important functions in this group with examples. So I really like the fact that I can just flip through this and then try to find, in the different sections, try to find the function that I'm looking for. This is especially helpful if you don't know what something is called or even what keywords you might start to look for, because one of the big challenges with Emacs Lisp is just figuring out what things are called. So Shortdoc, you can just call it with metax Shortdoc, and then you can browse through it. And as you can see, there are a whole lot of different things that are included there, and you can probably define your own too if you want to. So, for example, string-related functions show me all the things one time I was trying to figure out whether it was called repeat or whatever. It's actually called make string. So you can see all of the examples there. Now, this is great for finding functions. And sometimes you want to have even more information about something when you're looking at it. So if I Control HF, which is the describe function keyboard shortcut, it'll default to the symbol at point, which is helpful, and it'll show me the documentation for it. But you can actually get even more documentation than this, and that's where the helpful package comes in, which is another thing that I've been finding really useful. Now, helpful is not built in, but you can install it from Melpa, which is the Milky Postman Emacs Lisp package repository. Archive. A, not R. Archive. And you can find the instructions for doing that at melpa.org. So let's get this into our configuration. I paste it in, I evaluate the lines, and then it has a bunch of commands that replace the functions that we have. Not replace, but they encourage you to bind it over the keyboard shortcuts for describe function or describe variable or describe key and so forth. For example, if I press Control HF, it will now call helpful callable. And if I then use something like sequence find, maybe, then it will show me not only the signature, the arguments for the function, and the documentation for it, which is fairly normal, but it'll give me as well, references. It'll let me enable debugging, e-debugging right from there, and even include the source code. I find that looking at the source code for functions is very helpful. And before, I used to use describe function or find function. Describe function will give you a link to its implementation, and find function will try to find is it actually called find function? Function. Yeah, so there is a find function that finds the definition of a function. But with helpful, I can get the source code right there. So then I can say, show me all sorts of things, and I don't have to do that extra jump. A whole bunch of other things in case you're curious. It'll show you like the symbol properties or whether something is advised or not. You get some of that as well with a regular describe function, but this is a little bit of extra. So that's the helpful package, which I do find helpful, as it says. And as Alejandro points out, even source code in C if it's available. So I think I was talking about libxml, parse XML region, parse HTML region is actually the thing that I mentioned. You'll see here that it's defined in xml.c, but the source code is here as well. So all it does is it calls the parse region from libxml2, which is arcane wizardry, and I don't know how to fiddle with the C side yet, which is why we ended up hacking it at the Emacs Lisp level instead. So helpful is actually very helpful. But one thing that makes it even more helpful than that is another package called elisp-demos. And elisp-demos adds some extra extra examples to this. So let's try that out here. So now that I've included that, it has added some advice around helpful update to load the demos. And if I look up something like partition, maybe, which is that function we mentioned earlier, you'll notice that there's a new section here called demos. And an example here of how someone uses it to, you pass a list, you pass a number, and it gives you some results. I put in this patch recently that the maintainer has accepted, hooray, and it allows you to add your own notes. So you can add a note there. And the kiddo was awake, so I better talk even faster. Okay, so the last thing I wanted to show is you can use this not only to include, hello kiddo, you're awake, not only to include your own examples, but also you can use it to take other notes. So here, for example, is a set transient map. So there are examples there. If I look at tabulated list mode, I think there aren't any demos for this one yet, but very quickly I will show you before I feed the kiddo some breakfast. Although if you want, you can start getting your own breakfast. Okay, is you can also use that to add your own notes here. Like this is a blog post that had a whole bunch of information on how to set up tabulated list mode, which will open eventually in some browser. Okay, I will just open it here because I just remembered my default browser is Firefox, so we will show that some other time. Okay, so this is the blog post that explains a lot about how to use tabulated list mode, or at least it gives a very short example. And then, actually, let's just copy this over here. Sure, we can add, it's not static. Let's make that, I don't have my usual structs defined here. Okay, so now if I Control HF tabulated list mode, you can see here the, oh, that's not an end export, is it? That should be an end source. Okay, so you can see here, it has the example that we've just added, and you can also include whatever notes you have about the thing. And that is probably all I can do today because I gotta go feed a kiddo. All right, folks, thank you for joining me. Next stream is probably Sunday again, probably around this time, but maybe with faster talking. Thanks, everyone, and have lots of fun. Thanks for dropping by. You could have just prepared a